Folks, here's a segment about the economy. We're going to go back to Morning Joe for a second time this stream because they put together a segment around the new Washington Post article explaining the stubborn price of groceries. And so let's take a look.
Pew Research, 72% of Americans say they're very concerned about the cost of food and consumer goods. Our next guest is taking a look at what's driving those prices so high. Joining us now, White House economics reporter for the Washington Post, Jeff Stein. So, Jeff, what is it?
Yeah, grocery prices are still climbing from when Joe's dad bought them. It's incredible. We've seen inflation come down from 9 to 3%, huge progress, but a bunch of idiosyncratic factors, including floods in California and the hurricane in Florida and other international shocks, including the war in Ukraine, have meant that even though some consumer prices for things like used cars and gasoline have fallen, grocery prices remain really sticky. They rose by 12% 2 years ago, which was the highest number in over 4 decades.
Okay, so floods, hurricanes, war in Ukraine, so climate change and Vladimir Putin, those are the two famous scapegoats of MSNBC here. But as you can see here, Biden takes aim at grocery chains over food prices. So I wanted to look into this because before we got good enough at doing this to the point where I could do this for most of my living, I would shop grocery stores. I shop Instacart, DoorDash, things like that. And so I'm very conscious of grocery prices. And yes, they are stubbornly high. So let's see how much the grocery chains are at fault. Seems like they are culprits to a point. But if you actually look, in 2020, the grocery chains' profits skyrocketed for obvious reasons, that there were no restaurants to go to. I mean, you can get takeout at a handful of places, but you couldn't dine out that year. So it makes sense that their profits would soar. But then in the past couple of years, as inflation really kicked in, because inflation really kicked in 2021, 2022, grocery chain profits remain high, but they've actually started trending down back to, high levels, but within their normal range. So you can't really blame the grocery stores too much. Can we blame climate change? Can we blame the war in Ukraine? Well, to a certain extent we can, although this then doesn't make that much sense, that food companies have reaped record profits amid the hunger crisis. So maybe it's not the retailers, maybe it's the manufacturers, maybe it's the companies themselves who are exploiting droughts, bird flu epidemics, hurricanes, and the Ukraine war as an excuse to keep supply low and jack prices up. That's my working theory. We're going to get into this a little more, but go ahead.
I was actually very curious about this because now where I'm staying, and this was intentional, I'm staying in like a real neighborhood in New Orleans. This is not a tourist area where I am. It's not a bohemian artsy area that tends to be synonymous with gentrification. So you can't really go by prices in a place like that, like 7th Ward. I would define that way off the French Quarter. But this is like a neighborhood. So I went out food shopping when I got here last night. Yeah, I was surprised, man. Like what I paid for eggs, orange juice, milk, pretty much what I would pay in Harlem. So how can people afford New York? Literally, they're paying the same as in New York.
By another 5% last year. And this is the number one way that people say that inflation is still hurting them, far more than housing, far more than gas. As Joe was saying, this is the critical economic issue, and there's no really easy option for the Biden administration. They have approved the biggest expansion of food stamps in generations, and that has been huge for keeping, the bottom 40 million or so people from really facing a much bigger spike in food insecurity. But if you're right above that threshold in sort of the lower middle class, you're not really seeing that benefit, and you're also being crushed by, these huge increases. We've seen some price normalization, lettuce, eggs, tomatoes, apples, all those things have come in the right direction, and the White House is really eager to continue to see that progress as some of these, as I said, idiosyncratic supply chain factors play out. But
idiosyncratic supply chain factors. Okay, so
and I just want to point out how he opened with a joke minimizing the problem. Imagine that. Food prices have gone up since Joe's father was shopping.
Yeah.
Fucking
Idiosyncratic supply chain factors. That goes on for 4 minutes. We're not going to watch the whole thing.
With that level of empathy, he really belongs at State doing their press conferences.
Yeah, he could take Matthew Miller's job when Matthew Miller resigns and has to check into therapy, for all the horrible lies he's told. Let's take a look at some of these profits here. Kraft Heinz, some of their brands, Heinz Ketchup, Oscar Mayer, Jell-O, Ore-Ida, the potato company there, Lunchables, etc. Up 448 net profits, 255 to 887. Conagra brands, 219 to 342. Marie Callender's, Ready Whip, Slim Jim, Orville Redenbacher, Hunt's. Food companies are taking advantage of this very precarious moment. This is from Time Magazine, says Irit Tamir, director of Oxfam America's private sector development, which seeks to fight inequality to end poverty and injustice. They are hiding behind a very good story of the pandemic, inflation, and the Ukraine war to say that they need to raise prices, but they are actually just creating a smash and grab for profit, exploiting and exacerbating inflation. And it's not just packaged food manufacturers that are experiencing a recent profit boom thanks to rising prices, says Joe Maxwell, the president of Farm Action, a nonprofit that campaigns against corporate influence in the farm industry. Some food producers and suppliers are also reaping the same rewards. Cal-Maine Foods, the largest egg producer in the U.S., reported that its revenue doubled and profit surged 718% last quarter because of higher egg prices. So let's see that graphic there. This is the top of the list, making bacon. Notable food companies with massive net income increases. There's Cal-Maine Foods, from $40 million to $323 million. Their brands include Egglands, the famous egg brand, Lands of Lakes, Farmhouse, and 4Grain. The article continues, the company that we just mentioned there has pointed to decreased egg supply nationwide due to avian flu as the reason for higher prices and record sales. The avian flu, which is tearing through poultry farms across the U.S., wiped out some 58 million birds in the last year. But Farm Action believes that there's another culprit, price gouging. You think? You think you're going to explain that from avian flu? No, that's a company knowing that there's an avian flu, knowing that they can put signs in the stores. Because I literally saw signs in the stores. We apologize for the high price of eggs. There's an avian flu outbreak. Oh, there's an avian flu outbreak. Well, if you were really doing the best you could for us under these circumstances, why did your profits spike over 700%?
Right.
700%. This is why you can't put it on the grocery stores, because no doubt they're making money, but they're actually making less than they did in 2020. The real culprit here seems to be that the food producers, given the supply chain issues, have chosen to choke supply and raise prices rather than try and fight through whatever supply chain issues exist or supply issues exist, or level out their prices to keep profits flatline. 718%.
Well, in this, for people, we have a very viewpoint diverse audience, from commie to Nazi, we'd like to say. That's going to be on our next T-shirt merch, from commie to Nazi. Some people are very, pro-capitalism, and very often very similar to the communists. What they're talking about is this very ideal vision of how capitalism is supposed to work versus how it actually works in the real world if you actually try to apply it. So the theory of capitalism is that this can't happen, right? Because your competitors will undercut your prices, and in the end, those prices will come down, and it'll benefit the consumers and the society. The competition will act as its own price control. But it doesn't take into account what Marx was correct about, that in the late stages of capitalism, the wealth has consolidated into fewer and fewer hands, and they use the power that gives them to control the government, so that you wind up having this completely deregulated capitalism, or really a capitalism that is regulated against competition, that is regulated against those free market forces. So from the I think it was the Washington Post article about this, that you're down to just a few food companies that supply most of the food.
Right. It's like
So-
it's like the cable companies or
Right.
cell
So
phone
what?
companies.
You think these guys don't talk?
Right.
I mean, it's illegal, but you think they don't talk? You think they don't meet up at the golf club? Hey, man, don't fuck it up for everybody. Keep the prices up here. Blame it on COVID. Blame it. We have a unique opportunity to make money hand over fist. And
Well,
people
also, when you have-
got to eat, right? People got to eat.
Of course. And when you have the kind of control over the market that a company like Eggland's Best has, you don't even have to coordinate. You don't even have to call a meeting. What Eggland's Best charges, that becomes the set market price.
Right.
Because if some small company wants to undercut them, good luck. If one or two companies does it with with much smaller scale distribution, that's not going to hurt their profits at the end of the day. And if too many companies do it, well, then they can just lower it a smidge, right? It's not going to hurt them. It's not going to hurt them. Look at the room they have to operate here. Look at the room they have to operate here. So worst that's going to happen is what? You're going to force them to come down a few cents a carton?
Right.
Because they just don't have the power. There just is not the competitive power. There's no one who can operate at that scale.
Right. And there's no mechanism for price controls, right? And really, look, I understand there are problems with price controls. Like very often you're suppressing the marketplace, and then when you release them, you get this explosion in prices and you get chaos in the markets. This is really, if you want a capitalist solution, this is why we have antitrust legislation. But antitrust legislation is only as good as the government wielding it. You have to use antitrust based on the principle by which Standard Oil was broken up. Microsoft would be broken up. Apple would be broken up. Facebook would be broken up. You wouldn't have this this kind of a market for a few players to completely dominate all aspects of the economy. That's not capitalism, right? We can all agree on that. From commie to Nazi, we can all agree that's not that's not how
All about bringing
capitalism is
people
supposed
together.
to work.
Please clap.